Hello and welcome to lesson 2-2. This lesson is titled Estimate Sums and Differences of Decimals. So let's go ahead and watch our short video lesson quickly before we get started on our notes and guided practice.
How can you estimate sums? Think about this question during the lesson. Students are collecting dog food to give to an animal shelter. Estimate how many pounds were collected in weeks 3 and 4.
There is more than one way to find an estimate.
One way to estimate a sum is to round each addend. If you round each number in the table to the nearest hundred, what do you get?
Now for rounding every single one of these to the nearest hundred, we're going to take a look. So a hundredths place is going to be our rounding place, and then we're going to look over the tenths place to decide. So week 1 would round up to 200 pounds. Week 2, we have a 2 here, and then we're going to look over at the 9. That'll round up to 300 pounds. Week 3, we're looking at the 2. We're going to look over at the 3. That's going to stay at 200 pounds. Week 4, the 3 is our rounding place, so we're going to look over to the 4. That tells us we're going to stay at 300 for week 4, and then we're staying again at 300 for week 5.
Rounded to the nearest hundred, the pounds of dog food in the table are 200, 300, 200, 300, and 300. Use these rounded numbers to estimate the sum of the pounds collected in weeks 3 and 4. 237 and 5/10 is about 200, and 345 and 1/10 is about 300. So, 237 and 5/10 plus 345 and 1/10 is about 500. The students collected about 500 pounds of dog food in weeks 3 and 4. Will the actual sum be greater or less than the estimate of 500 pounds?
Select your answer.
Now let's stop and think about this for a moment. It's asking us, is our actual sum, is the real answer going to be more or less than 500? So let's take a look at how these numbers were rounded. 237 and 5/10 rounded down to 200. So 200 is less than my original number. 345 and 1/10 rounded down to 300. 300 is also less than that original number. So that means whatever my real answer is, it's going to be greater than 500 because my original numbers were greater than what I rounded them to.
The actual sum will be greater than 500 because both rounded numbers are less than the actual numbers. Another way to estimate sums is to substitute compatible numbers. Compatible numbers are easy to add. Two compatible numbers for 237 and 5/10 and 345 and 1/10 are 250 and 350. So 237 and 5/10 plus 345 and 1/10 is about 600. The students collected about 600 pounds of dog food in weeks 3 and 4. How does using compatible numbers instead of rounding change the estimate in this example? In this example, using compatible numbers results in an estimate that is closer to the actual sum, because the compatible numbers are closer than the rounded numbers to the actual numbers. Now you know how to estimate sums.
All right, let's go ahead and take a look at our notes and our guided practice for this lesson. Okay, so our lesson notes, our lesson title is Estimate Sums and Differences of Decimals, and our focus question is how can you estimate sums? So you can use rounding or compatible numbers to help estimate a sum. Now remember, rounding follows very specific rules. If the number you're looking to after your rounding place is 5 or greater, then it's going to round up. If it's 4 or less, that means you're not going to change your number at all. So 42, if I want to round it to the nearest 10, so the 10 is my rounding place, the 4 is in the tens place. I'm going to look at the ones place that has the 2 to decide. Now, since the 2 is less than 5, it tells me that that 4 is going to stay the same. So it's going to round down to 40 instead of staying at 42 or rounding up to 40, rounding up to 50, because 42 is closer to 40 than it is to 50. We can use compatible numbers. Remember, those are any numbers that are easy for us to use for mental math, and they're close to our real numbers, but they're not following the same strict rounding rules. So if I have 24 plus 18, I can use compatible numbers and I can say 25 plus 20. That's easy for me to work with, and it's close to my original numbers. And that'll give me an answer of 45. So 24 plus 18 is about 45, or it's close to 45. Let's take a look at our first example. An amusement park has 2 roller coasters. One is 628 feet long. The other is 485 feet long. If you ride both roller coasters, about how many feet will you travel in all? So let's think about what we know. I know the roller coasters are 628 feet and 485 feet. I also know that I'm not being asked for an exact answer, because whenever they say about how many, word about means we're going to estimate. We don't need an exact answer here. So I can use rounding or compatible numbers to solve this question, and I'm going to do both to show you how they work. So if I'm going to round to the nearest 100, 485 will round up to 500. 628 will round down to 600. 500 plus 600 is about 1,100 feet. If I use compatible numbers, 485, I'm going to make that into 475. The 628, I'm going to make that into the 625 because I know 25 and 75 will give me 100. And 400 plus 600 will give me 1,000. So using compatible numbers, I got, again, 1,100 feet. So you'll travel about 1,100 feet if you ride both roller coasters. My next example says estimate the difference 22 and 84 hundredths minus 13 and 97 hundredths. So if I'm going to round to the nearest whole number, that means I'm going to look at the ones place. That's going to be my rounding place. And then I'm going to look to the first spot to the right of that decimal point, which is my tenths place. That 8 tells me that the 22 is going to be closer to 23. In the 13, that 9 tells me that the 13 is going to be closer to 14 than it is to round down back down to 13. So 23 take away 14 is going to equal 9. Now, if I use compatible numbers, 22 and 84 hundredths, I'll say that's about 25. And 13 and 97 hundredths, I'll say that's about 15. 25 minus 15 gave me an estimate of 10 here. So you can see that they're a little bit different, but they both work. Let's go through another example before our guided practice. This one says Golden Gate Park in San Francisco has an area of 1,017 acres. Central Park in New York has an area of 843 acres. About how many more acres does Golden Gate Park cover than Central Park? Do you need an exact answer? So I know right away I do not need an exact answer because in the question it says about how many or about how many more. So I know the length or the area of the Golden Gate Park. I know the area of Central Park. So the question, since it says about how many, I don't need an exact answer. So I'm going to use rounding, and I'm going to round to the nearest 100. 1,017 is going to round down to 1,000. 843 is going to round down to 800. 1,000 minus 800 leaves me with 200. So Golden Gate Park is about 200 acres bigger than Central Park. All right, let's take a look at your guided practice questions. In the example 22 and 84 hundredths, minus 13 and 97 hundredths. Which estimate is closer to the actual difference? How can you tell without subtracting? So we knew that rounding was closer because it rounded to 23 minus 14, which is very close to my original numbers. The compatible numbers, 25 minus 15, were a lot farther away. So the rounding gave me the more accurate answer. Number 2, in the example on the previous page, students collected more dog food in week 4 than in week 3. Estimate about how much more. So I'm going to find the difference. I'm going to do 345 and 1/10 minus 237 and 5/10. So I'm going to round first to the nearest 10. So 345 will round up to 350. 237 will round to 240. And when I do 350 minus 240, I'm left over with 110 acres. Next, we have question number 3. We have 49 plus 22 and 88 hundredths. So here I'm going to round to the nearest 10. My 49 will round up to 50. My 22 and 88 hundredths will round down to 20. 50 plus 20 gave me 70. For number 4, 86.9 or 86 and 9/10 minus 18. Here I'm going to round to my nearest 10 again. I'm going to be left with 90 minus 20. And 90 minus 20 will leave me with a difference of 70. Number 5 is 179 plus 277. I'm going to round to the nearest hundreds place. The 179 becomes 200. 277 becomes 300. 200 plus 300 leaves me with about 500. Number 6, we have 23 and 2/10 minus 9 and 71 hundredths. The 23, I'm going to pick compatible numbers for this. I'm going to make that a 25. The 9 and 71 hundredths, I'm going to make into just 10. 25 minus 10 is 15. Number 7, 23 and 8/10 minus 4 and 7/10 will round the nearest whole number. The 23 and 8/10 becomes 24. The 4 and 7/10 becomes 5. 24 take away 5 is 19. Number 8, 87 and 2/10 plus 3 and 9/10. I'm going to use compensation here. And I'm going to take off one of the tenths from 87 and 2/10 and give it to the 3 and 9/10 to make that a whole number. So that's going to become 4. So then I'm going to have 87 and 1/10 plus 4 is going to give me 91 and 1/10. Number 9, we have 38 and 9/10 minus 21 and 4/10. I'm going to add the 4/10 from the 21 and 4/10. I'm going to move them over to the 38 and 9/10. That way I'm going to be working with one number that has a decimal and one number that's whole. So 39 and 3/10 minus 21. 39 minus 21 will leave me with 18, and then those 3/10 left over. So I used compensation here. And then for my last question, I'm going to round to my nearest hundreds place. 576 plus 94 and 6/10. 576 will round up to 600. 94 and 6/10 is close to 100. 600 plus 100 equals 700. So your answers may not match mine exactly, and that's okay because there's so many different ways that you can estimate in order to find your answer using mental math. If you have any questions on this lesson, please don't hesitate to ask me. Otherwise, have a wonderful day. Take care. Bye-bye.